Nohomai, Hirimai, Tenekoto Katoa, Na Mihinui Kia Koto Katoa. Warm greetings, everyone, for those joining us here in New Zealand and for those joining us from all across the globe. Bom dia, boa noite. It's very nice to see you all here, and it's a pleasure of welcoming to this lecture of Maria Matos Silva as part of the Thinkers and Doers. For those that do not know me, my name is Bruno Marques, and I am currently the Program Director for the Landscape Architecture Program at Victoria University of Wellington, Te Rangawaka. If you are new to our lecture series, the Thinkers and Doers aims at bringing together practitioners, scholars, students, and a wider community of landscape architects and other affiliated built environment disciplines to share ideas and to hear the latest innovations in the field. This is a joint initiative between the New Zealand Institute of Landscape Architects and our Landscape Architecture program at Victoria University of Wellington. Our 11th speaker, Maria Matos Silva, apart from being a very good friend of mine, because we actually studied together at university, she's an assistant professor of landscape architecture at the Instituto Superior de Agronomia, University of Lisbon. She graduated landscape architecture in 2007, completed a master's degree in urban design in Barcelona in 2010, and a postgrad dip in urban and regional planning in 2011. She then embarked on her PhD in public space design, also in Barcelona, where she completed it in 2016. She also obtained a recognition of finalist for the European Prize Manuel de Sola Morales 2019 edition. Also, since 2016, Maria is a research associate at the Research Center for Architecture, Urbanism and Design at the Faculty of Architecture, University of Lisbon. And she also has been involved in many research projects and has published in various international peer-reviewed journals and conferences. And her research interests are mainly related to landscape, design and management, urban planning, sustainability, urban flooding, public space design, and adaptation to climate change. Maria is also part of the board of the Portuguese Association of Historic Gardens. So her lecture, titled Public Spaces for Water, looks into the phenomenon of floods as recurrent urban events which are expected to aggravate in the near future. Facing this problem, the design of public spaces is presented as a key component in adaptation to current and expected urban flood events. In addition, climate change adaptation endeavors have already entered the urban agenda and are influencing urban planning and public space design approaches. This emerging tendency is further prompting new flood management paradigms that acknowledge the practice of integrating ecosystems and the natural water cycle. Public Spaces for Water, a design notebook, displays a different approach to tackle the urgent problem of urban flooding. In this lecture, the importance of public space design in adaptation action is explored and traditional flood risk management practices are challenged, as public spaces provide the opportunity to integrate and reveal the complex connections between natural, social, and technical processes. Designing for water is a present and urgent matter on which the future of our cities relies. Just before we start, very quickly, some housekeeping rules. Do not forget that Maria will be sharing her screen, so please keep this window open so you can see her slides. I would also request you to remain muted throughout the talk, and at the end there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions either verbally or you can write them in a chat box. Without further ado, please join me in giving Maria a warm welcome all the way from Lisbon, Portugal.
Hello, Bruno. Thank you very much for the invitation. Indeed, it's a great pleasure to be here with you. First of all, because you are a dear friend, and it's very good to be in a place where we never imagined we would be when we were studying. So it's been a great adventure being friends with you. I will now share the screen, right?
Yeah.
Let's first I have to put here in the PowerPoint on. Yes, and I put here. I will share. No, am I sharing already?
Not really.
Not really. Tela 2. Yes, I want to share tela 2. Yes. Sorry, I'm having a bit of trouble because I'm not being very smart. Compartilhar.
Now it's coming up.
Okay. Now here. Can you see the title?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So you see the title, and I would like to also thank Bruno, of course, but also to the New Zealand Institute of Landscape Architecture and also the Victoria University of Wellington. I have been watching some of the lectures from this series, and they were very stimulating, and I congratulate all for this initiative. It's great to have talks on this matter. As Bruno told you, I will speak about public spaces for water. I will essentially divide this presentation in 3 moments. The first of all will be to try to explain what do I mean by public spaces for water. Then the second moment, I will talk about a conceptual framework of flood adaptation measures that are applicable in the design of public spaces, which essentially will be about the contents of a recently published book. And finally, I will try to evaluate some of these measures identified in this conceptual framework in the particular case of the city of Lisbon. So starting off with the problem matter, how all this started. This is a part of my PhD research that was finished in 2016. And the problem matter was flooding, was the fact that flooding was a recurrent phenomenon that was pretty much intense, and that it will very likely continue that trend in the future, not only due to climate change that we all are all aware of, but also in case or if we continue the business as usual path, right? Following conventional forms of how to deal with floods. And cities are particularly vulnerable to floods, as we know, and within cities, then public spaces are even more vulnerable to climate change and to flood events. We all know also that public spaces are extraordinarily adaptable, right? But under a pattern of relatively stable changes. When these changes start to become, like many scientists say about climate change, without precedent, right? So in a scale that we have never seen before, then we argue that public spaces, they might not have the same autonomous adaptation capacity. And that is why the concept of adaptation gains strength. So it is this inclusion and contrast with traditional forms of sustainable planning and flood risk management, that besides considering their decisions or basing their decisions on the analysis of past trends, the adaptation processes, they then add up also the consideration of possible future climates through projections and simulations. So they join together this ex post analysis based on knowledge, factual, so observation, and it's pretty much objective, and the ex ante analysis that's based on assumption, prognosis, and it's fundamentally subjective, right? So adaptation, in a very brief way, I mean, we could talk about the concept for an hour, but in a very brief way, it can be seen as an instrument, as a tool that might help us to deal with uncertainty, not only the uncertainty about the evolution process of any city, but also the uncertainty about anything that relates to the future, right? We can never anticipate what is going to happen. These uncertainties have been widely acknowledged as something that must be considered in the way we think and design cities, right? When we look to flood management practices or the way we have been managing floods throughout history, we note very clearly that first civilizations, they lived with floods and they were able to take the most out of floods, for example, to fertilize the soils, while also being very aware of its dangers. It was next civilizations that started to understand floods as something that would bring more harm than good, right? Only by the end of the century, and probably connected to the first climate change projections, but also some catastrophic events such as the Katrina, did we realize that we could not protect, defend, control, or even manage any natural system in its entirety. And so we shifted our focus. We shifted our focus from trying to reduce the probability of communities to experience floods, and we started to focus on the reduction of society's vulnerabilities. This change is a paradigm change. This makes it completely different. We stopped wanting to manage floods, and we started to want to manage the risk of flooding, so focusing on this vulnerability. And what this did also was that besides considering structural and rigid measures, we started to think also about other types of measures that would be more flexible and that would actually work on this matter of trying to reduce society's vulnerabilities. And how can we reduce society's vulnerabilities? So this is the point that I want to reach in the first part. One of the ways which we could reduce society's vulnerabilities is through public space design, through not only the question of design, that design can actually communicate, right? But also the subject matter, the bottom line of being a public space, of being the place of communities, of where people can actually relate to, for example, the natural phenomenon of a flood. And this affirmation, this hypothesis, it can be evidenced in many cities, such as Rotterdam, New York, or London, that very early on in this adaptation agenda have matured the relationship with water through the design of public spaces that recognize water's resilient capacities, and were able to connect the infrastructure with people, right? Through these examples, which these ones here mentioned, Rotterdam, New York, but also Dubran and Chicago, which actually encompass the most comprehensive adaptation plans and most ambitious, money-wise, right? But a few others, together with literature review, it was possible to highlight some of the the challenges that the inclusion of flood adaptation measures within the design of public space has brought to contemporary urbanism and urban design practices. And I'll try to sum up them. So, first of all of these had this common goal of the requirement to abide with further expanded horizons. So, not only to consider the next 50 years or the next 100 years in the planning design, but also the next 150 years, 200 years. The acknowledgements flood protection are unrealistic and unwise. So basically recognize our limitations as human beings in the planet. The need the articulation with other municipal agendas and ongoing programs. Basically, the search for synergies in order to get the most out of resources. The search for a combination of multiple strategies and solutions. So to get rid of the idea that it is possible to fix the problem with a single solution, the one-size-fits-all approach. And finally, the compliance with the notion of public space as an urban system that serves and then can serve the city. It was also possible to verify that competent citizens are more likely to implement effective adaptation actions. And that's mainly due to the fact that within in order to deal with those existing vulnerabilities. Well, competent municipalities are close to its citizens, and that's because they are more close to have the know-how and experience to deal with the vulnerabilities they feel. Of course, there's a lot. This is a questionable argument, but it's a starting point. These are two pictures of Lisbon in a hot summer day. And you see how very quickly some citizens just decided to adapt. Another point that I would like to make is that public spaces, as being public spaces, as being places for everyone, community places, they entail specific characteristics that are particularly beneficial for the implementation of adaptation actions. And I'll also try to systematize those. So public spaces favor interdisciplinary design. In places founded through an interdisciplinary means, we are all, I believe we all agree on that innovative thinking more easily emerges, right? Nowadays, nothing good comes out of doing your jobs alone. Public spaces also embrace multiple purposes. By combining flood adaptation measures with public space design, adjacent purposes are likely to also be part of from other sectorial needs, such as water purification, microclimatic amelioration, and so forth. Public spaces may promote community engagement. So by engaging community in the design and in the construction of that public space with that purpose, with that infrastructural purpose, you can, it's possible to raise awareness, not only about climate change, but also it may lead to a self-determining need for and willingness to for action and monitoring. Public spaces, they are supported by an extensive physical structure, which when we think about flood management is particularly useful. Public spaces expose and share value instead of camouflaging it underground, in underground drainage, or in an area that is restricted, that you cannot go. And finally, public spaces also promote risk diversification and communal monitoring. And I'm saying this because through public spaces, if you implement these measures in the public spaces, you are investing in more than one strategy, in more than one public space. And that risk, not only risk is dissipated, but then different actors from different places and different communities might also serve it's more likely they become involved in the management and monitoring of that particular infrastructure. It's nevertheless very important to highlight, and especially in the moments, in the historical moment that we're living these days of the pandemic, that the more work that needs to be done in the local scale, there's still a lot of work to be done. We may never forget the efforts that are also necessary on the global scale. These are two efforts that are completely dependent on one another. It's when we talk about the same thing happens when we talk about the duality between mitigation and adaptation. It's two sides of the same coin, right? If on the one hand, mitigation can give us very important knowledge and has those decisions that are top down, adaptation, then you can say that it gives us the critical wisdom. So, and we need both in order to get where we want. So now there are a lot of public spaces, and I'm sure you know a lot of them, that through design have approximated people and communities with the natural water cycle and its associated processes. There are even other designs, other projects that have been specifically designed for the primary reason of flood adaptation. Yet in this stage, what I wanted to do in the PhD was also to assess existing types of solutions, existing types of measures that were applied to public space in a way so I could have a range of them, and then I could, with that systematization, understand how could I use it in a more mainstreamed way in our cities. So the goal was this creation of a conceptual framework that would exactly give me that systematization process and results, obviously. So through a wide range of examples, literature review, and so on, I was able to systematize 40 types of adaptation measures that were then organized in 16 categories. These categories and types of measures, they then could be organized in various different ways. I chose to organize them through their infrastructural strategy, but I could have organized them, for example, on how much they cost to implement, or how much they cost to be maintained, or where in the water basin are they more more suitable. Sorry. Or their ecological value, their social value. I mean, I could have organized it very differently. What would be important is to understand that these measures, they were related to one another. So if I want, so I needed to build a different chart that was not a tree chart, but a chart in this format of a pie, where I could, if I wanted to look for very quickly the types of measures that would help me in the initial brainstorm phases of a project, would help me to know the types of measures for storing water, I would consider not only these ones that are directly connected to that infrastructural strategy, but I would also consider the other measures that are indirectly connected to that strategy. So this diagram gives that flexibility of adding new measures, of taking off other measures. So this is supposed to be an open process where we could continue to grow on it. And essentially it serves for initial stages, for discussion, and that was the purpose of it. Of course, all the detailed methodology, it's on the PhD and also on that publication up there. If you are curious, you can find it very easily on the internet. And also a simplified version of all this conceptual framework. It can be seen on the book. This is the commercial part, 1 second of commercial part. You can look for it in the Routledge webpage. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, in the Taylor and Francis group. I can also, for those who are interested, send you a voucher with a 20% discount. If you want, you just chat there, and I make sure the voucher gets to you. I had the honor to have the foreword by Professor Jack Ahern, a professor of landscape architecture in the University of Massachusetts, whose work has greatly inspired the first years of my PhD studies. And I also must mention the support from my research center and from the Landscape Architecture Association of Portugal. But the book develops upon this idea of public spaces for water. It describes each identified type of measure through sketches of the typologies. And it also talks about a lot of examples. So for each type, it's explained in more detail, and and it gives a lot of examples that are also illustrated, like floating pathways, floating islands, bioretention planters. cisterns from the Stata Center. What they have in common is that they're all existing designs, that they exist, they were constructed, and there is this critical aspect and critical point of view in the book about how to connect the infrastructure with public space and how people can relate with that infrastructure. These designs are not my own, they are from a colleague, they are very beautiful, I brought them here to serve as some sort of teaser for the book. They are from Vânia Farinha, and there are a lot of these in the book. So I've talked about what I mean. I tried to explain what I mean by public spaces for water. I talked to you about the conceptual framework, and now in the final 5-10 minutes, I would like to try to assess this proposed conceptual framework in the case of Lisbon. To see if it's useful, if it makes sense still in this moment in time. Well, this moment was 3 years ago, but still, it still makes some sense. So for those of you who don't know very well Lisbon, it's there in the tail of Europe. You see that yellow, blue arrow. And I chose Lisbon for this assessment not only because it is my hometown, but also because it is a very densely urbanized territory with a chronic problem of flooding that has this tendency of becoming worse. Briefly characterizing the city, so it's characterized by a torrential precipitation regime, so it means that it rains severely in winter, and there's a big moments of lack of water in summer. So when it rains a lot, and when it doesn't rain, it doesn't rain. And also Lisbon has this land morphology that is characterized by a lot of very small hydrographic basins with steep slopes, with the exception of that huge one there that you see, which is the Alcântara Valley hydrographic basin, the Alcântara Basin. But this type of configuration, it promotes a lot of the so-called flash floods. It's also a city that it's very much influenced by the Tagus dynamics, so that will affect mostly the waterfront of the city. And it's also a city with a very old and obsolete drainage system. In this small exercise, in this small assessment, I focused only on the floods from, there were pluvial floods, right, that had the origin in rain, that would give rise to the so-called flash floods. And also on the basic principle of sustainable urban drainage, which is that all rainwater can be managed before it goes into the underground drainage system. And that has benefits, not only ecological, but also social and economic. And also, I was also used the guidelines of the New York City Green Infrastructure Plan that had a methodology that was particularly interesting because it was quantitative, because it served to test essentially what we call green infrastructure, but applied in the local scale. So not that strategic vision, but the vision of green infrastructure applied locally. And it's also a plan that's been on since 2010. So it also has a couple of years in order to, that enables me to assess the quality, and the results are actually impressive. But this methodology basically puts on the table that it is possible to manage the first 25 millimeters of rainwater that fall within a totally impermeable area, and you can catch those the first flush 25 millimeters of water through a retrofit that would only take a percentage of that impermeable public space. So with this premise, and then a particularly targeted methodology, I studied three types of measures, three types of smaller hydrographic basins within this bigger area of the upper area of the Alcântara Basin. and applied different types of measures from the conceptual framework that were that I previously talked about. And I then extrapolated those results into the entire upper basin, following the basic principles of contemporary stormwater management that is applied extensively throughout the territory, and also bearing in mind an extended time frame. Of course, the results for us landscape architects were not very surprising. Regardless, let me say that it was possible to verify through very conservative analysis through this exercise that if I could retrofit, if I could change only 5% of those impermeable public spaces, I was able to retain 8,200 cubic meters. If I was able to retrofit 45%, then I was able to sustain and retain 75 million cubic meters. These numbers are not impressive. They are very, how I just said before, conservative. Regardless, if we consider the drainage master plan that was for the city of Lisbon, that in order to resolve the situation of the upper area of the Alcântara Basin would implement 2 reservoirs that in total would have the capacity of 51,500 cubic meters, then the argument is simple, is that these 2 types of strategies, they are comparable and they must be equally considered. I do not consider that hard infrastructure is not necessary, quite the contrary. The reservoirs, the underground reservoirs, or the deviation tunnels, which, by the way, it's an improvement from the, or an update from the previous master plan that is currently being in construction. They can be considered as fundamental and critical in order to solve problems in a very quick way and in the short time frame. There's nothing better than this. Regardless, when we consider the uncertainties, but also the certainties about climate change, then this type of conventional measures, they might rapidly become inadequate. So it is a matter of looking again at this moment in time of this paradigm shift and to think about if we are indeed reducing or making all the efforts to reduce society's vulnerabilities. And I do believe that the question here is that the unequal investment at least should be made on this other strategy, a territorial strategy, whose major goal is on the reduction of vulnerability, and it's focused on the long run, and not only in the effective and most quick way to get rid of water. If we are able to converge the network of public spaces together with an encompassing stormwater management plan in the same territorial vision that emerges from the local scale, we are offering an improved strategy to tackle this recurrent phenomenon of urban flooding. A strategy that will include most definitely the drainage plans, but it will also include plans of collection, storage, depuration, transport, infiltration, but most of all, and that's the big purpose of the theme of public spaces for water, a systemic strategy that will also serve for communities to rethink their relationship with the natural dynamics of flood events. A systemic strategy that will, in every single public space retrofit, will strive to keep water where it lies, will accommodate water where it goes, but most of all, that will value water as the most precious resource that it is. I'd like to highlight something that you are all aware of, is that water plans and stormwater management plans, it's already mainstreamed in many major cities. Victoria in Australia, for example, it's one of them. And I'm sure most cities will eventually follow the path of successful adaptation achievements. Yet there's also a question of timing, right? And as we know through the history of cities, we mustn't lose the train, otherwise we can't so positively influence the course of a more resilient urban environment. Actually, I'm finishing. I'm quicker than I thought. Maybe I spoke too fast. But just finishing now and wrapping up on a positive note for my hometown, is that Lisbon is the green capital, has won the Green Capital Award, and that's because, as you were thinking, it did huge amount of efforts and successful efforts in order to become a more sustainable city. One of them is the works being done at Praça de Espanha, that is currently under construction, designed by the Portuguese Landscape Architecture Office, NPK, I don't know if you translate. It is a great example of a new public space, a public park, that will reveal the course of water and therefore approximate people with the natural dynamics of an urban water system. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to your questions and comments.
Thank you, Maria, for that very inspiring lecture around water, and it's always good to see our hometown. Now it's the time for people to pose their questions. You can either ask them directly to Maria, don't forget to unmute yourself, or if you feel a little shy, you can always type them in the chat box and we will read them. In order to give you some time to think about your question, I will start by asking one to Maria. Water management, I think, is one of those issues that every landscape architect sooner or later will face it professionally. And also it's one of those topics that it's interesting to deal with city councils and politicians and engineers that are more around grey and built infrastructure and also about expensive infrastructure solutions. Mm-hmm. What's your opinion about how ready are we as a profession to deal with water, and how ready are we to actually engage with these affiliated professions near to us?
Well, Bruno, I think when you say we, you're saying landscape architecture. Yes. Yes?
Yeah.
Well, I think we are ready. We have been ready for ages. We know how to do this. So I don't think this is a problem of knowledge on tech. It's not a technical problem. And we can argue that other professions, they might need to rethink their actions only in the sense that they were too accustomed to know to assume that the climate was stationary, was not changing. But we have that flexibility since the conception of landscape architecture. So that's not something that's very much new. I do believe that the challenge is more related to how we will connect this with society. It's more societal change. And also, how can we take the advantage of this new way of us to rethink as a society, the Green Deal, right? The thing of rethinking on how we can live in a different world and how we can use that and channelize that in our profession. I think that will be the challenge. I don't think it's a technical challenge. It can be a political challenge, but also the political is completely connected to the social challenge, because politicians they do what we want. We just need to know what we want, and we need to act on it.
So you think that is about educating people?
I don't see it so much as educating. I think it's more. On the other hand, we cannot put all that effort and all that need to change over people, right? People just want to live their lives in the best way possible. When I say societal change, I mean indeed, we are in a moment where we are rethinking, and we are doing that everywhere. We are rethinking our role in the planet. Where do we want to live? In what world do we want to live? And I think that's still a challenge. That's still something we are discovering, and landscape architecture is looking at in that way, where it makes sense, where our profession can go in that sense. Of course, technically, we can always improve. I mean, there's a lot still to be learned about the power of plants to purify toxics from the city. I mean, we don't know everything. Of course, there's still a lot to be learned. But the major issues, I see it more as that connection, as a changing. There needs a change in our way to in where we want to live, right? And that's also a challenge for us as designers.
Perfect. Questions from our audience? Maria.
Hello, this is Maria Landoni, and thank you so much, Maria, for your presentation. It's really interesting. My question is, earlier in your presentation, you mentioned that, you know, over centuries, humans have coexisted with flooding and have different adaptations. So I'm wondering, you know, if you see those precedents informing current practices, and if you are exploring some of those in your book, or how you incorporated that knowledge into your body of work. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria, for your question. Well, it's the way I've incorporated that knowledge is very simple. This was just the fact that in the evolution process of cities change. And they sometimes they go back and forth in order to go forward, right? And that change, we have a lot to learn from past civilizations, and definitely that's one of them. Regardless, it's never the same, right? It's never the same. We have to the question of risk and the question of to reduce society's vulnerabilities. It's not linear because sometimes you can actually when advocate the inclusion of flood adaptation measures within public spaces, we are assuming the reliance of a local scale and social response. And in our contemporary society, that's not linear, right? When you can actually do a design that can communicate with people about and can make climate change visible in the most strict way, and that can work very well. Some people can be connected and can work in that sense and can change a community, but it can also work on quite the reverse. So in that sense, the solution would be, that's also part of the adaptation concept, would be to have permanent and continuous monitoring in any adaptation plan. So monitoring and learning. But yes, there's a lot of knowledge about those civilizations that are in the book. Some examples. One of them is the Baoris in India, the most beautiful tanks that have this technique to store water and to use it. Also, because it's very encompassing, the scope of flooding. It's not only about stormwater management, it's about all types of flooding, not only pluvial flooding. So you would have also floating mechanisms and technologies that were used since the Aztecs. And yes, most definitely, we have to look at history and learn from the past. I'm not sure if I replied to your question. My question was a bit confused, my answer.
I think, yeah.
Yes.
Maria is happy with your answer. Laura was asking for you to share again the slide about the goals, but I think, Laura, I will answer on behalf of Maria. This lecture is being recorded, so once the recording is ready, I will be sharing the link with all the participants, so you're going to have the opportunity to recheck the slides again. There is another question, this time in Portuguese. I will try my best to translate that for our non-Portuguese speakers. It's from Raquel Frias. She's asking, or she's commenting, that at times governmental agencies are far more stricter in a way that they allow us designers or anyone to work with waterways. She's also commenting that there is lots of work to be done, especially among governmental agencies and city councils. Not entirely sure if there is a question here. Maria, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, I can. I mean, there's obviously a challenge politics-wise. The basic principle of this type of water plans that I'm talking about, that it implies a long time frame. There's already a very big difficulty in the politics field, because because usually those measures that promote climate change adaptation, that promote stormwater management plans, they are still not very acceptable for communities. And that's where I go again to the societal changes. Where do we want to live? Because politicians, they are very opportunistic in a way, because they will do what we want. We need to want that, and they will follow, and the regulations will follow. But we are not so much ready for that in the sense that we have other priorities. We have the priority of having other things, other comforts. The fact that when it rains in a city, you do not want to wet your feet, and you cannot catch any rain. It's part also of our culture as Portuguese. There's something major than that, but it is difficult, and we're still in the long way. What I can tell you, Raquel, also is that a lot of major cities have implemented this type of plans, and you can look in Australia, you can look in New Zealand, you can look in New York, London, and you see it is possible, and these municipalities are indeed doing a lot of very interesting things. The other municipalities, they will follow eventually, or they will lose the train.
Any other questions from our participants?
Olha, pera lá, eu não te estou a ouvir, eu deixei de ouvir. I stopped listening.
Okay, can you hear us now?
Ah, yes, I do. I'm having problems with my things. Sorry, what did you say?
Oh, I was just saying, while we give some more moments for people to probably think about their questions, looking at the question of landscape architecture, what do you see as future challenges? What should we be doing that we aren't doing?
Look you.
Maria?
Am I good now?
Yeah, we can hear.
Okay, I'm good.
Did you hear my question?
No.
I was saying, like, looking at our profession of, as landscape architects, what should we be preparing, future-wise, and what should we be doing that we aren't doing at the moment?
That's a very hard question. You're being mean to me. I think my biggest wish is not only concerned about landscape architecture. It's something that we all talk about very often, but I don't see it as often in the real life, is to actually be more, to do more interdisciplinary work. We know this, we argue this, we write about it, but in practice, then we don't see it so often. But the truth is, when you go to the best designs, when you go to the best solutions, when you go to see those real reference cases, you will see who was working there, and you see an amazing team full of different specialties. So what I know is that, talking about myself and my profession, I'm most definitely dependent on all the engineers, hydraulic engineers, stormwater management engineers, but also people from urbanism, people from the social sciences, architecture, environmental science. I mean, the difficulty will be to improve on our capacities. I think that would be something that I would like to do. But I cannot speak so much generally. I haven't put too much thought about it. But,
that's an excellent answer. I think it's something that, as we said, we keep complaining about, that we should have more, diverse and interdisciplinary teams, but then we exclude them once we get into our projects. Okay, there is another question from Simon in a chat box. Very interesting presentation, thank you. In your proposals for Lisbon, can you say which were the predominant techniques you suggested by volume of water stored?
Well, I went to the types that had the storage as primary and secondary function, and I did that, and I used some of them through those guidelines of the New York City master plan. I don't understand really the by volume of water stored. What I did was I did a detailed design of those places, and so I decided exactly the depth of that infrastructure, in the sense that the depth of that, how much soil I would put, how much, how do you say in English, gravilha, and all the drainage, all the drainage layers. So I decided on the materials and on the thickness of the layers, and I detailed that. And with that, I was able to estimate the percentage of water that I could sustain in each layer through basic calculations of volume. And I did that also with the precipitation regime for Lisbon, which is not the same as in New York, and also in the smaller basin. So the premise was to collect the first flush waters in all that smaller basin, in that particular and smaller public space intervention. I'm not sure if it solves, but this case, this is not really a case study. This was more like a work study. So I was just testing that it was pertinent to still talk about this in this particular case. It was only like an application to verify the conceptual framework. And that's in the paper, that's not in the book. Lisbon is not in the book. Well, it is in examples, but not this exercise. That is in some journals.
Thank you, Maria, for that. I think we're probably going to wrap it up here. On behalf of the New Zealand Institute of Landscape Architects and the Victoria University of Wellington, thank you very much for finding time to talk to us today.
Thank you.
I think it was a very interesting presentation and a very interesting overview on water and public spaces. For those of you that are interested in Maria's book, once I send out the link for the video, we will provide you more information about the discount vouchers. You can also contact Maria directly. She provided her email right at the beginning of the presentation. And thank you very much. I wish all the best to Maria and to everyone attending this presentation wherever you are based, and I hope to see you again soon at our next Thinkers and Doers.
Thank you very much, everyone, for listening, and thank you, Bruno, for the invitation. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.